Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat Podcast. In this edition, I'm absolutely delighted to bring back to the channel Tom Barclay, of course, football writer for Sun Sport, covering Tottenham Hotspur week after week, a part of the Tottenham Way podcast. He's got a new book out called Miracle in Bilbao. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also a Tottenham Hotspur YouTuber. Tom, I can't believe it's been over a year since you were on the channel. How time has flown by. And we've got a new manager. We've won a trophy. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for that introduction, Chris. Great to be back on. Yeah, a lot has changed since the last time I spoke to you. I think back then we probably would have been talking about would Ange stay, would Daniel Levy sack him. We all know what happened. He stayed in the job for a lot longer than maybe people thought at the time, but obviously ultimately left, and now we're in the Thomas Frank era.
Tom, let's talk about you personally, first of all, because as I mentioned, you've written this wonderful book, Miracle in Bilbao, and, Ange Postecoglou guiding Spurs to that Europa League trophy, an unbelievable night. He thought he was going to get a third season. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the book. How did it start? When did you start writing this?
Yeah, how did it start? Well, it was around the time of the Frankfurt away game that I suddenly thought, maybe this, if they go all the way, it might be worth writing a book on this. The publishers, Pitch Publishing, who do lots of sports books, I've been in touch with a few years before about potentially writing a different book, which never actually got off the ground. But as the sort of matches were ticking down, obviously Bodo Glimt felt quite a favourable draw. Even though I guess back then we were all worried that they would somehow mess it up because of how badly the Premier League season was going. I got in touch with them, but it wasn't actually until they finally won it that we all got given the green light, I suppose, both from the publishers, but also kind of myself, really, because it was, there was no way that anyone was going to want to relive that season if Spurs hadn't won in Bilbao, because it had been so difficult in the Premier League. But then, because it had been so difficult, with the glory of the Europa League journey ending 17 years of hurt, it made it even more interesting than your average season, because they had this sort of contradiction in a way of the team going so far and doing so well in Europe, and yet struggling so badly in the Premier League, all with this fascinating manager, whatever you think about him, Ange Postecoglou, at the heart of it. And so it was after then, and a sort of mad, furious sort of month, 5 weeks over the summer, where I really got down and wrote it.
Tom, the debate is still going on. Should Ange have got that third season, in your opinion?
I mean, yeah, I've stuck with the same opinion I've had throughout. I felt like he had, the way I put it is, he'd earned the right to correct the wrongs of his second season. I feel like, no doubt, the Premier League season was a disaster. He finishing 17th is the worst Premier League season Spurs have had. Yes, he had some terrible injuries that are mitigating factors, and I don't think had they got the Europa League season gone so well that he would have put quite as many eggs in that basket, I suppose. So I don't think, had they gone out earlier, that they would have finished quite that low, but nonetheless they did. But having won that competition and ended that sort of long run of no trophies at Spurs, I felt he deserved the right. But once the decision was made to get rid of him, I did feel that Thomas Frank at the time was well deserving of this job at Spurs. I felt like he'd earned his stripes definitely at Brentford. We'll come on to how well the job he's doing, I suppose, later. But I was kind of sad that he didn't give him that third season opportunity. But that's the way it happened, and it's the past now.
Tom, just very quickly, going off, on a non-Spurs tangent here, the Nottingham Forest job, should he have got more time there?
Well, I mean, all managers deserve longer than what was it, 8 games or 39 days, the sort of shortest spell ever. I do think I was quite surprised by how he went about that job. Maybe by getting it, he sort of guaranteed that he would change the style from day one. But I was hoping that he would learn a few lessons from how it went at Spurs, that you can't change everything straight away in the Premier League, particularly going in effectively mid-season. One thing doing it with a pre-season, but to try and change things so quickly, felt risky. Having said that, watching Forest during that period, even though there were obviously moments that were very reminiscent of Spurs defending wise, conceding goals from set pieces and all that kind of thing, they were very unlucky as well. They just couldn't take the chances a lot of the time. I guess that was actually a bit of a recurring theme at Spurs, really, to a certain extent. So I did feel for him in that way, but and obviously, every manager deserves longer than that. But I just look back and I wonder if he looks back and wishes he'd sort of gone about it a little bit more softly than trying to be so radical in the changes he implemented from a team that had been pretty successful, let's be honest, under Nuno Santo, and a completely different style.
Now, just to tell all of the listeners and viewers, Miracle in Bilbao is available at all good bookshops and on Amazon. The links are below, so do check that out and buy your loved ones this wonderful book. Tom, just staying on you for a minute before we move on to Tottenham. Of course, you are part of the Tottenham Way podcast. That seems to be thriving and growing bigger. You're still doing YouTube. How's that going?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's going well. To be fair, the book kind of took over my life a bit over the summer, so I feel like I have towards the end of last season, and I got, because I only started it at the start of last season. I feel like a lot of the people that followed me were Australian, for an obvious reason for that. So I think I had a bit of a drop off after that, but I'm looking to sort of get it back going now, trying to do it more regularly not just after matches, but after press conferences. I have to say, I felt like after every Ange press conference, for good or for bad, there was always loads of talking points. With Thomas Frank, it's probably less so like that. He's less likely to give you a sort of fascinating anecdote or quote like Ange would, to give you more of a sort of talking point. But that doesn't mean that he isn't interesting in his own right. And I definitely need to get back to it. So if you guys wouldn't mind following Tom Barclay, journalist on YouTube, I'm going to be doing far more of that and giving you sort of updates after my thoughts on games, thoughts on press conferences, and just during the season. And like you say, the Tottenham Way podcast, which we've been doing for a while, from an audio point of view, but it's only this season we've started doing it on YouTube, is growing nicely with the three other guys I do it with. So thanks very much for plugging it, Chris.
And Tom, what's it like at the moment being a journalist with The Sun, covering Tottenham? I know we're going to talk about Thomas Frank and the season so far in a minute, but from your point of view, working, Tottenham every day, what's that like?
Yeah, it's a dream. It always has been a dream to cover a club like Spurs. I mean, even though I'm not sort of a boyhood Tottenham fan, I have definitely taken them into my hearts when you cover them on a regular basis, particularly seeing them being very lucky to go all the way out. I mean, in my introduction in the book, I referenced my predecessor, Paul Jiggins, who Spurs fans out there might be aware of. He very tragically passed away. What are we now? 3 years ago, maybe more than that now. I'm trying to work it. Early 2022. But anyway, he was an absolute top guy who I learned a lot from. But the reason I mention him is in his 10 years of covering Tottenham, he never got to cover them winning a trophy. He got very close, obviously, with the Champions League final and other finals. But it just reminded me of how lucky I was to be there in Bilbao and see them go all the way. And then, this season, it's been a bit of a different dynamic going into press conferences. Thomas Frank, first of all, comes across, and by all accounts, is an absolutely sort of fantastic person and a really lovely guy. But I suppose with Ange, I felt like you could ask him his opinion on anything. And maybe some Spurs fans might see this as kind of misdirection on his part when things weren't going so well. But from a journalist perspective, you could ask him his thoughts on, well, not that we ever asked about Donald Trump, but I'm sure if I wanted to, he would give me a fascinating answer. Yeah, or like you could imagine, you'll remember well, Chris, because you follow obviously all of the press conferences, the multitude of clips that went viral, whether it be a question that I asked or whoever. And I don't know if there's as much of that with Thomas Frank. He's more sort of focused on the football, doesn't give away as much, particularly with injuries. We're going through that at the moment with his sort of shutting down questions over Dominic Solanke's whenever he's going to come back, which I don't blame him for. I get why he's doing it, but it means that it's probably you're having to write around his press conferences, and by that I mean, rather than leading off with the amazing quote that Ange came up with, more sort of contextualizing it with what's going on, with more about the football rather than the personality, I suppose, which in its own right. That's, to be honest, that's more what covering clubs is more generally like. It's more that Ange was a bit of a unicorn of a manager who was made life very easy, put it that way. From a journalist perspective, there was always something to write about.
Do you know, Tom, whenever something major happens at the football club, I literally go and buy every national newspaper and read everything that you guys write. And the day that Ange Postecoglou got the sack, I thought all of you were very sympathetic. I was actually surprised by the reports that I read.
Really? What, you thought we would be more harsh towards,
Yeah.
like, he deserved it and all that kind of thing?
22 league defeats, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, the numbers are pretty damning in the Premier League, and I've tried to always reflect that with my coverage that that wasn't good enough, and he said it wasn't good enough, but it's obviously not good enough. It's nowhere near good enough. I mean, if we're being critical of Thomas Frank for some of the results so far, albeit I think that's more about the performances than results, albeit not in the last week or so. Then you definitely have to be that way with Ange Postecoglou. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't. There wasn't part of me that liked him just because of the way he was, which I know might sound strange to the fans out there that might be watching who don't follow the press conferences as closely as yourself, Chris, because they'll probably mainly gauge what Ange was like with the media via his post-match TV interviews, where he could be very spiky, and often would really, classically, look down at the floor and not give much away and be quite grumpy, particularly after a defeat, of which there were obviously many last season. But I actually found, particularly pre-match in the press conferences, he'd really open up and he'd be a fascinating character. So there definitely is that element of liking him. In a different way to Thomas Frank. I like him too. So it's just, but that probably was part of it. But had he lost that final, as Dan Kilpatrick, my friend, tried to sort of convey, albeit in a slightly cack-handed way with the whole Clowngate situation, he would have been he would have presided over one of the worst seasons, if not the worst season in Tottenham's Premier League history. So he would have probably well deserved the sack at that point. It was just the fact that he did win the trophy. Tottenham don't win many trophies. However you say he went about it, and however easy the run was perceived to be, it in a way, does that matter as much? I don't know. I think the fact that he actually got over the line put a lot of credit in the bank for him. And I think also the circumstances of how he was kind of left to sort of await his fate. That's what felt like that maybe some of the sympathy came from that, because as he said afterwards when he was at Forest, and as I'm very much led to believe, he thought he was gone a long time before that. But then there was this element of, he finally did deliver the trophy, and could that change Daniel Levy's mind? Could something different happen? And it felt like the club just sort of waited for the euphoria. Ultimately, I mean, no one will ever really know, apart from Daniel Levy, whether he was in a genuine dilemma over whether to sack him or was just waiting for that post-final euphoria, which we saw amazingly during that the parade, to die down before making that sort of ruthless sacking. But I think that part of it was part of the sympathy, because he kind of felt for the guy. He just won a trophy, and then he was just waiting for the axe to fall, where I suppose it could have happened a lot quicker if they really wanted to, if that was the way it was going to go.
You mentioned the parade there, Tom, and I've got goosebumps here on my arm. So I tell you, that was an incredible day. And I tell you what, I was very similar in my thought. In going into that final, I thought Ange is going to go whatever happens. But when I went to that parade and saw the amount of people, what an incredible day, what an incredible occasion. And then when he came out and said about the third season, I thought, when I was walking back to the car, I thought, there's no way they can sack him. After that, Spurs have just won a trophy after all these years, 41 years of, waiting for a European trophy. There's no way that they can sack him. And I was very much for keeping Ange on a third season because of that trophy parade and because of the Europa League. But I can see, in hindsight, I can see it was probably the best decision, with 22 league defeats. But we could talk about that and debate that all day and night long. Let me ask you about where you think Spurs are right now compared to, say, 12 months ago, because there has been so much change in the dugout. There's been so much change on the pitch. Of course, Daniel Levy and board members have left. New guys have come in. A lot of change in the last 12 months, Tom. Yeah,
it's been amazing. I mean, I don't think you can overstate what a absolutely massive shift not Daniel Levy not being there anymore. He ran the club. He was the club. He was the person that you'd be always having your thoughts, I guess, when writing about it, what the fans thought of him, how he was running it, being very aware towards the end of the antipathy that a lot of fans had towards him for many reasons, many which were legitimate. But then as the journalist, you got to be fair and balanced, and it wasn't like everything he did was bad, but you can tell that the fans by then didn't want to hear it. It's just amazing as a writer about Spurs on an everyday basis, he's very much comes into your thinking over most pieces you write, and then suddenly he's gone like overnight in sort of crazy circumstances. I mean, I remember I was in the office that day, just about to leave, and then suddenly it dropped at 6 o'clock that he'd gone. You start making your calls and trying to find out what has happened, and then, as far as I'm led to believe, quite quickly it was kind of an ousting. He didn't want to go, and the Lewis family decided to get rid of him, and that was definitely the message of how it was going about, of how it went down, and this supposed new era. I'm sure fans are always going to be skeptical, I suppose, when you've had an owner for so long over this alleged new era, and did they know, and did Vinay know all this time? But all I can go on is people I've spoken to, it feels like genuinely that was the case. Vinay genuinely seemed to, unless he's got an incredible poker face, it seemed like he genuinely thought he was going to be working with Daniel Levy for a long time. And you got this sort of seismic shift, which I think supporters are still to this day really are sort of trying to get their heads around. He'd become the lightning rod for all the fan frustration. As much as it was ENIC as well, it was mainly Daniel Levy. He was the face of it for all the ills that the fans perceived, rightly or wrongly, and a lot of it rightly, of however many years. And then he suddenly disappears and he's gone, and you're sort of left wondering sort of what to think. And then after that, it's not just him. It's there's other directors who've left. Whether it be Donna Maria Cullens left. Rebecca Capelhorn. I don't know if she's gone yet, but she will be going soon. These are like big people behind the scenes that are kind of probably not people aren't aware of as your everyday fan, but have been sort of part of the Spurs furniture at a high level in recent years. New people coming in, and then you've got the key figures that people are completely aware of. Obviously, we talked about Ange, Sonny, other players leaving, new faces coming in. It's been a real transitional shift, which when you sort of take a step and zoom out a little bit, and you look at how I've been thinking about this, how Spurs have started the season, and when you look at where they're at in the Champions League and the Premier League, maybe it hasn't been as sort of, it's been better than people have maybe given it credit for, because in the moment, some of these performances have been really underwhelming and could have been much bigger defeats. But actually, they're not a million miles off the top four at all. They're in a good position in the Champions League. They have been missing some key attacking creative players, albeit I would say a lot of them they knew they were going to be out for a long time, so they could have planned better. But we'll come on to that, I suppose. And actually, Thomas Frank, when you think of it that way, so long as they're progressing, which a few weeks ago it was hard to see, but in the last week there are signs of him starting to work out what his best team might be, and a style and a discernible kind of approach of the Thomas Frank way. And you start to think, oh, actually, it's maybe it's been better than you think when you consider all the mad changes that have happened on and off the pitch in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Tom. This last week has obviously been a lot more positive. 2 home wins, 2 clean sheets, and when you look at the tables and the overall positions where Spurs are at the moment, 1 point off the top 8 in the Champions League, only 4 points off the top 4 in the Premier League. And I think if you'd have said that to Spurs fans at the start of the season, after 15 Premier League games, this is where Spurs will be, would have gone, yeah, okay. It's the fact that Spurs are in the 11th at the moment in the Premier League, and it's so tight in there at the moment. 3 points can take you up to the top 4 or 5, and 3 points adrift can take you down to about 15th. So I think overall we are in a good position. Do you think then the criticism aimed at Thomas Frank and the players so far this campaign has been quite unfair from the fan base then?
Yeah, it's a hard one. Like a week ago or not, and a week ago or so, I probably would have said not really. The sort of the booing of like Vicario, I felt a bit much.
Yeah.
Albeit, I think when people have sort of talked about it, hearing people speak about it in the media who don't watch Spurs on a regular basis and haven't felt that kind of cumulative effect of disappointment at home for so long throughout 2025, and they've been very damning of that reaction. It feels like it needs a bit more context there. Like I just said, it's been so disappointing at home for so long. You get to this game, and it's been a tough week already with getting battered away at your arch rivals Arsenal off the back of an awful performance against Chelsea. PSG actually weirdly felt a bit more positive after that, because at that point all fans wanted to see was a bit of creative ambition. They went and scored some goals in a ground where they weren't expected to get any kind of result because PSG are the holders. But then after 6 minutes, it's all kind of over, and through a really stupid mistake. To be honest, I mean, it was kind of a couple of mistakes from Vicario, wasn't it? He could have got rid of it straight away.
Yeah.
Decided to sort of dribble it out, and then he still could have got rid of it, and then he tries to play it down the line. So I think it's kind of like the sort of almost, this is what my colleague Tom on the Tottenham Way described it as, almost like the arrogance of that mistake from Vicario to sort of twice defy the obvious, what the fans wanted to see, and the obvious course of action by not just clearing it at first and then hitting it down the line. That kind of really annoyed the supporters more than it normally would, and that's what probably led, along with obviously all the frustration for the last over 3 wins in 2025 at that point at home. And I think that's where that came from. But at the same time, you can't really ever justify booing your own players during the game. And I do actually think, as much as Thomas Frank was probably is a bit risky by having criticizing that publicly, given how performances have been going, I do agree with him. I don't think that really helps, and I don't think that was the right course of action. When it comes to Frank and frustration with him, I don't know. I feel like some of the performances have actually been really had been really disappointing. Particularly if we consider like Monaco, they drew, but they should have lost heavily. In fact, it was ironically Vicario played really well. I mean, Wolves now is looking worse and worse with every week with how bad they are. But they were a Paulinia last-minute goal away from losing at home to Wolves, who've only got 2 points. Bournemouth should have been 3 or 4-0. Chelsea should have been 3 or 4-0. Arsenal was terrible. So there's no dressing it up. Those performances were really poor, and the XG and the lack of shots in the first half, like. It's not just fans getting grumpy and frustrated. It was hard to see at that point any kind of progression. So I can see where that came from. I wouldn't, as I said throughout with my YouTube or pieces I've written or Tottenham Way, you got to give him time. Definitely got to give him time. And I think the last week is sort of hopefully starting to show that. But it was the way that we couldn't really see, what he was trying to do, to be honest, for those first games, where he was trying to go with this. At least in the last few games, I feel like you're starting to see, like I said earlier, a sort of more regular team, a more discernible style from Thomas Frank. Although even that, it's Brentford at home, it's Slavia Prague at home. I mean, they're games you should be winning. So I think a lot of Spurs fans still need to see it happen against a Liverpool at home, perhaps, or a Forest away at the weekend to start really getting on board. But a bit of a long-winded answer, but I guess. Yeah, I sort of see where it came from, but I don't agree with the booing of Vicario, I guess.
Tom, you as a journalist and a non-Spurs fan, I think that's important to say that, because we do get a very different perspective from a non-Spurs fan. Have you questioned whether Thomas Frank is the right man for Spurs during these few months that he's been at the club?
I think I have questioned that. I thought, as I said from the top, I felt like he deserved the chance. I felt like he was a good choice if they were going to make a change. Frank was a smart choice, kind of for the reasons they actually said in the statement when they hired him. He's got a track record of developing young players, and when you look at Spurs and what they've done, probably done too much last season with over relying on younger players, but they've got some really exciting youngsters. Archie, Lucas Bergvall, Xavi Simons now, who's starting to show what he's all about, which is great to see, and more. You think of what he's done to Ollie Watkins and Ivan Toney and lots of other players over the course of their career. That seemed like a really compelling reason to have Thomas Frank, and the fact that he was clearly overachieving with Brentford, which I still think, unless things are going to change in this new era of the Lewis ownership, Spurs try to bat above their average. It's just their average is higher up in the league than where Brentford are. Brentford are trying to stay in the league or more than that, obviously, but they're up against sort of the lowest budgets. Spurs are trying to compete with the best in the division, but don't spend as much generally as those clubs. So having someone who's got a track record of performing above expectations felt Pochettino-esque and felt sensible, but obviously there was no track record of doing it at a club like Tottenham. So that was the gamble, and particularly not ever managing in the Champions League. So knowing what it was like to have a schedule where you're changing, having to play games every couple of days. And I have to say, throughout some of this early period, I have questioned. He doesn't have that experience. Can he adjust? How can he deal with this? What can he deal with? Players with bigger egos, all these different things. And to be fair to Frank, the other day he was asked a question you might have noticed about because it was ahead of the Brentford game. It felt like a perfect time to sort of compare and contrast. How has he found it so far, particularly with the pressure being on him as well. And he did admit one of the biggest differences that he's kind of still getting to grips with are the games every few days. He's never had it before, except during that COVID period where there was a really congested back at Project Restart, where we had games every few days to try and catch up. So that's been an adaptation. He said he's been much more aware of the expectation and fan pressure than he's ever had before at Brentford. And he also admitted he still doesn't know his best team, which doesn't help. So I think he was quite honest there. And those I think they're all legit. Even he's sort of thinking about it. So it would be kind of strange based on some of the performances we've seen not to be wondering that. What I hope is happening in the last week is the start of him starting to answer all those questions that people like me and I presume a lot of Spurs fans have had over whether he really can do this job or not. I mean, he said just the other day ahead of the PSG game that he 1,000% knows how to build a club. Now, hopefully we're starting to see the start of that. Let's hope.
Tommy also said in the press conference that there are lots of articles written, thousands of podcasts, and what else is it? Thousands of podcasts and thousands of social media experts. So does it help by people like us going on podcasts, keep analysing everything that Thomas Frank does, everything that players do? The amount of stats, facts, etc. that are out there right now, everyone is talking about it. It is such a high pressure job, isn't it, for Thomas Frank? Do you think that it's only within this short amount of time that he's been there where he suddenly thought, wow, this is, a lot of pressure?
Well, I think that's what he was referring to when he said, he's noticed that the pressure and expectation is up on what he had at Brentford. I mean, for context, he lost the first 8 of his first 10 games at Brentford. I remember when he took over, and I'm sure he was under certain pressure, but it was the Championship, and with respect, it was Brentford. This is another level, and I do think Tottenham's kind of coming back to what I said before. They're in a bit of a strange space in the sense that they have such a massive following all over the world that comes with a certain level of expectation, particularly because of what Potter managed to achieve. Even though he never won anything, he obviously made them regular competitors at the highest level. That means that fans expect them to compete no matter what, really. And I mean by compete, I mean right at the top. And yet they're doing it compared to Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, obviously this season, Man United, all these other clubs who are outspending them. So it's whoever is in charge, it is an uphill task. But regards to your question, well, first of all, he says he never reads any of it or watches any of it for that reason, because there's just so much of it. And I totally get that.
And said that as well, though. He clearly did.
Actually did read it in the end, to be fair. We were very aware of what he wrote. He was aware of what we were writing, at least. Yeah. I don't know if he was listening to everything, but definitely I know he was reading that stuff, because he literally told Dan at one point that he was. Anyway, I have to say, I'm always skeptical when a manager says they're never aware of any of this stuff, because it feels like, really, you're not sure at all. But either way, the press officer will always brief them beforehand over what kind of questions might come up. But no, I feel like this is just the modern world, isn't it? Like, yeah, maybe sometimes we go overboard by analysing things to death, and it can probably get to players if they get sort of really, they read really negative things or they hear really negative things. I mean, the thing is, when it's not going well, it's hard to be positive to a certain extent. But I like to think with my coverage, despite what you might think of the Sun, sometimes might be, obviously a bit more sort of in your face than you have like a broadsheet. But I still, hopefully, people read my stuff regularly. I'm trying to be as fair as possible, and I definitely feel like I do that with. When it comes to YouTube and the podcast stuff. And I feel like yourself, Chris, you're a very influential person now. You must, I know for a fact, I can tell from your often your social media posts that you yourself as a sort of voice of the Tottenham people to a certain extent will have pressure on you to very quickly dismiss a manager, whether it be Ange last season or maybe Frank this year, and you have to sort of stand up for what you think. So I don't know. It's always very easy to knock someone down straight away when things aren't going well straight away. So, but again, that's just where we're sort of at to a certain extent. Hopefully, it all comes from a good place, and it's just people wanting them to do well.
It's a good point, Tom, because the amount of time that people stop me or send me messages and say, are you Frank in or are you Frank out? And I'm like, you can be somewhere in the middle, and you can be a fan that wants it to work, and you can be a patient fan that, is going to be patient and wanting it to work. Because I must say, if I'm sitting here talking about Thomas Frank, a couple of weeks ago, Tom, I was saying that I'm not convinced by the football that we were seeing. When you looked at that Arsenal game, going to the Emirates, such a huge game for the Spurs fans, and we set up in the way that we did, and that was not acceptable to me. And some of the performances, like you've said, have been really poor. I just wanted to see signs, and I think that we've seen those signs in the past week of the way that we could play. But like you've also said, it was against two weak sides, really, with respect. So let's wait and see, what happens in the next couple of weeks, or certainly in the next couple of months. But I want to be convinced by Thomas Frank. I think it was a very good appointment in the summer, and I think that he's brought a real calmness to Tottenham. It's just whether he can take us to that next level. But we'll talk about injuries in a second. But let me ask you, as a journalist with the Sun, from the outside looking in, how is Tottenham perceived in the national media circle today, would you say?
In what regards? How do you mean? Like, how important we give them prominence, or do you mean how good?
Well, because I suppose Spurs have always been that banter club, particularly not winning a trophy since 2008, then winning the trophy in the Europa League in May. So I suppose we've got that off our back in terms of the banter. But how do you, as an outsider, see Tottenham? Do you see Spurs as a top four club? Do you see Spurs as being title contenders in a couple of years' time? Do you see Spurs being a mid-table club? Where do you see Tottenham right now? And also, let me go into talking about the ambition with the Lewis family. We've heard Vinay come out a couple of times. I was at the fans forum as well, lucky enough to be there, and he kept talking about ambition. Do you think that is dramatically going to change? I know we'll talk about the January transfer window shortly, but in the summer window, do you think Spurs will go bigger than we've ever been before? Is things going to dramatically change at this football club, would you say?
Well, there's a few different questions there. I'll start off with what the original question was and how I interpret it. Like, how do the media perceive Tottenham? Well, first of all, the fact that I have my remit is covering Tottenham. I cover England as well, but I cover Tottenham, and I do some other bits and pieces. But the fact that we, in this age, sadly, of where newspapers are at financially, we can still have someone solely on Tottenham tells you your answer. I mean, when Leicester won the Premier League, there definitely was more interest in them afterwards. But it would have taken quite a few seasons of them, being regularly at the top of English football before we would think it was worth it in putting someone solely on that club. If that kind of answers your question to a certain extent. So it shows you the interest that there is and how worth it is to have someone on that club. It's not the same, to be fair, as Arsenal, Man United, and Chelsea, particularly for us these days. But it's not far off because of just the widespread interest in it. And then when it comes to, I guess I don't really see it this way, but I see what you mean about the sort of banter club element. There is probably, the whole Spursy phrase, as much as it frustrates fans. There's a reason where it comes from. I mean, I remember last season when, this season, wasn't it? Was it with might have been the Brighton game? No, not this Brighton. Anyway, the last time they threw away a 2-goal lead and lost. Must have been last season, was the 10th time they'd done it in the league at the time, and no other club had got anywhere near it. And it just felt like that kind of thing regularly seems to happen to Tottenham more than anyone else. And that's like statistically like a fact. And so maybe that's where that part of it comes from. And yet the amount of column inches that go towards Tottenham, and it's, you can say some of it might be, ridicule, but I think that's actually not very much. And maybe when there's the opportunity for people to have a laugh, maybe they do. But I would say that's the same for everyone. I mean, look at Man United right now. It's just success versus lack of it. But when you actually think of how relatively little Tottenham have won since in the last 25, since the Premier League era came along, for them to have as much coverage as they do, and to have someone specifically on them, and not just me, and other papers as well and other places, underlines how important we perceive Tottenham to be within the media, and underlined by the level of scrutiny that Thomas Frank is now facing compared to what his time at Brentford was like. I mean, I remember his first press conference as Spurs manager. It almost felt like he was a little bit nervous. I think a lot of the time during that press conference, there were a lot of live issues that he probably couldn't really talk about, like what's going to happen to Son, what's going to happen to Romero, whatever it might be. And he knew what was happening, but he couldn't tell us. But he could have given more at the time, to maybe give us something to write about, I think, personally, at that point. But the point being is the level of fascination and intrigue and scrutiny and less sort of jokey questions that you might get at Brentford, because no one's that sort of in demand of getting the answers out of a club like Brentford with respect compared to Tottenham, again, sort of shows the difference between how we view them. Now, on to the next question about how I see them. I kind of explained this already, I suppose, with what they're expected within the fan base, at least, to achieve, respective to, at least until recently. We'll see what happens going forward, which comes on to the next question. With the money they put in on wages and transfers compared to other clubs, it feels like they are, again, trying to punch above their weight. They've come obviously very close. They've had some amazing players, and I'm South Londoner, but I grew up with a lot of Spurs fans as mates. They've always been like one of the big clubs in the Premier League, the key clubs in the Premier League that will hopefully always be there, and they'll always have absolute fascination in. It felt like under the Levy reign, they got pretty close to becoming one of the best under Pochettino, and then they kind of imploded to a certain extent through their own it was kind of self-inflicted. I think let's not rewrite history, as someone else told me the other day about Pochettino, because there's been a lot of sort of calls for him to come back now and how much love there was. It sounds like, I wasn't covering the club at the time, but towards the end of his time at Spurs, it does feel like, from what I'm told from people who were covering the club, there was a lot of fans who felt like the time was up at that point for him. So it wasn't like it was all a sort of brutal axing and why can't we go back to that period. But from the outside looking in, it felt like, the guy just got to a Champions League final. He was going through a rough period. Maybe they should have stuck with it. And then I kind of understand Levy's managerial choices subsequently for the most part, but they didn't really work. I kind of got the logic behind each of them, but they ultimately were proven to be wrong. And that also, for the most part, and that also extends to some of the signings they've made. Again, coming back to the fact that they always seem to be fishing in that pond of like reaching for the best, but not being able to having as much at their disposal, rightly or wrongly, as their competitors right at the top. And that means maybe taking more gambles on signings that some come off and be amazing. Son Heung-min being the prime example for, it's got to be one of the most value for money signings ever in the Premier League. But for every one of him, and every club gets signings wrong at times, but for every one of him, you've got obviously Ndombele, blah, 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 all the other players that you could list off who didn't hit the heights. And then, to cut a sort of long answer short, because there's a few questions in there. Yeah, that's what we're all wondering, aren't we? Like, it's been dubbed as this new era. Daniel Levy's gone. We need, was it genuinely the fact that he was running the club just how he wanted to? So when it comes to the wage turnover ratio of Spurs being right at the bottom, which I'm led to believe he saw as like a sign of how well he was running it, was that down to him, or ultimately has the Lewis family just, he's always been at the sort of behest of them? And so does that mean now, just because it's a different part of the Lewis family, has anything really changed? Well, the only way we're going to know the answer to that is from the coming windows. And for my mind, the real indicator of a change happening is through the wages. And if they end up spending similar kind of money to the rivals or the competitors that they deign to compete with, and that means Chelsea, Man City, whatever, rather than the transfer fees. But again, that remains to be seen, doesn't it?
That's exactly where I was going to go, Tom, talking about the wages, because do you think that players or even future managers at the club see Spurs as a top destination, or is it this stumbling block with the wages constantly, would you say?
Well, I think in football, generally, the more you pay, the better results you get. Obviously, there are examples of that not being the case. Man United ever since Fergie left, are the prime example of that not happening. But generally, that's the way it works out. It's rare that it doesn't. And so the evidence is there when they haven't paid as much as some of the other clubs in wages. It's been harder to attract players. It's natural. It's the same as any job in any world. But that doesn't mean to say that sometimes they haven't been very savvy. Like, footballers get paid an insane amount of money anyway. Tottenham pay insane amounts anyway. But I guess you got to stop thinking of it that way, because it doesn't really do you any favors. You got to start thinking of it as just how they compare to their rivals. And I don't think it's a surprise that they often go for younger players. They just generally don't cost as much. Not to say that's the wrong approach. That's served them very well in the recent past. Yeah, I don't know. I think that fundamentally, if another club who is of a very similar state, particularly if you're a foreign player or a player who has got no allegiance to a Chelsea, if you've got an option of a Chelsea, a Man City, a Tottenham, and you've got no allegiance to any three of them, you'll look at probably Chelsea and Man City, particularly obviously City, with not only the record they've got of winning trophies, but obviously they'll generally pay you more. So that's a challenge they always have faced. And I think, like I said, to their credit, they've managed to upset those odds generally when you look at league position over the course of the last 15 years. Hasn't led to cup to trophies. But again, I do sympathise with managers a lot of the time when it comes to trophies, because they're so on a knife edge. I mean, just look at England. We're so close to winning in the last few years, and it's one thing needs to go for you, and it doesn't. So yeah, it's a bit of a nuanced answer, but yeah, fundamentally that will be the difference maker if they start upping the wage structure. I think amount they're paying out on players that will likely correlate with better performances and improved results.
Tom, over the years on this podcast, I ask a number of Spurs fans, and I always ask the question, who was the last world-class player that Spurs signed? And a lot of people agree with my answer. Jurgen Klinsmann back in 1994. The summer of 94, the World Cup had just happened, and Klinsmann was a world-class player at the time. Yes, Spurs have had a lot of players since, but I'm talking about bringing in a player, world-class player at that time. Who would you say have been the last world-class player, or would you agree with that?
I mean, when you frame it in that way, that kind of goes to what I'm saying. Like Tottenham don't buy ready-made world-class players. Definitely not world-class players.
But will that change? Could that change under the Lewis family?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that comes back to what we're saying. There's the rub. There's the key factor. Like, are they going to basically be the same as they ever have been because they're the longest, running owners in the Premier League, or are they genuinely? Is it genuinely going to be different now? And now, all the messaging that I and other journalists are getting out of the Lewis family or sources close to them is that it is a different time, and they are super committed. I think there will always be doubts within the fan base over, and admittedly myself as well, over like, well, you would say all that if you were looking to sell the club. You wouldn't say, oh, we're looking to sell it, so there will always be those doubts over whether this is all just a smokescreen. But they have consistently said that we're in it the long term. We're Tottenham fans. We want this new era. The reason we got rid of Levy was because the success on the pitch wasn't good enough. That was the reason they cited. So they need to back it up with if they're going to talk like that, they've got to back it up now. And I think that will hopefully be shown in the next couple of windows. But I mean, how often I can't think of many clubs though, if you're looking for a world-class player, to buy a world-class player in the modern market, you're talking 100 million, you're talking 400 grand a week. Like, that is a step. I'm not that I'm a Spurs fan, but as someone who wants them to improve, I'm not expecting or asking for that. That's pretty rare. I mean, who does that? Not many clubs, even in the Premier League. I mean, it's not very. Man City bought Haaland, I suppose, and he was world class at the time, but it was for 50 odd million. But then again, he's on 800 grand a week or something. So City are a bit different, I suppose. But there aren't many that go and do that. It's more your 70, 80 million pound signings on 250 grand a week, which is obviously massive. But they're the ones, you buy a few of those over the course of 4 windows, and then suddenly your first team, your starting 11 is next level. And that's where I think they need to go from there. But yeah, Klinsmann, I'd have to go really through it. But I'm sure the fact that I imagine you would already off the top of your head have gone through this with paint, with a fine-tooth comb, it's likely it is probably him.
Yeah. Tom, how close or how far are Spurs away from competing for the Premier League? Because all of us Spurs fans, that's what we want. We want to see us competing for the top honours. Now, Daniel Levy, before he left in the summer, he said that we want to be competing on all fronts. How far are Spurs away from that?
Quite a long way, I think. I feel like Poch had a fantastic team, and yet he was still punching above his weight, or the team was still punching above their weight to be in the conversation of winning the Premier League, which ultimately they didn't. And then you look at that team, and it was so good. It was so full of world-class players. The main issue was the squad depth wasn't enough, albeit Leicester won. So we can go down this route. I don't know. But generally, that when you look at it across the sort of few years they were really at the top, I don't see this team right now being anywhere near that. But there's a lot of potential in it. There's a lot of exciting young players. I've done a piece today about Archie Gray, and he's obviously started the last couple of games, and he's only 19. And obviously last year he filled in various positions. But now one of the things I've been told is that last season he often trained as a defender, even when he wasn't going to start a game, because he was kind of obviously filling in with the injuries. But that often happened. Whereas even though he's actually filled in a couple of times in matches in defence, I'm hearing he trains all the time pretty much as a midfielder. So that's where not only does he definitely see his future, but how Frank sees him. And the last couple of games we're starting to see it. And if he's got the chance to sort of grow in that position, I mean, just look at Elliot Anderson at Nottingham Forest. They went into the under-21 Euros in the summer, and Archie was in the squad. Elliot Anderson was in the squad. Alex Scott was in the squad, who I interviewed a couple of months ago. He's a Spurs fan as well, so you're probably aware of him, and he's been linked a million times to Tottenham. And Alex was telling me going into that Euros, they didn't have a clue who was going to start central midfield, because Lee Carsley had so many options, and I think a lot of people just would have presumed it would be Archie. Now, I think the way Carsley works, he often prioritizes in these tournaments as he did in the tournament before, because I used to cover the 21s. He prioritises the players who it'll be their last chance to play in that tournament. Like, they'll be too old next time. And I do think that went against Archie. So, and Anderson and Scott regularly played in the same way that Harvey Elliott in the tournament, the one before, which I went to in Georgia, he actually was on the bench most of the time, even though he was one of their best players for the same reason. And then this time around, he was absolutely key player. But obviously Anderson and Scott really developed this brilliant partnership and became firm friends. And Anderson has gone on to become, let's be honest, a shoe-in to start at number 6 for England next summer, as long as he stays fit. I think Gray, if he gets the chance to improve like Anderson has at Forest, has the running power, the tactical nous. We're starting to see it now, similar to Brentford. At Brentford, where they often had, I've forgotten the Ukrainian players, midfielder that they've got, but he often used to drop in at left back when Keane Lewis Potter went forward. I think we saw that in the last game when Spence was sort of inverting quite a lot. We saw Gray drop in there. He's got that tactical nous about him to sort of play in that way. He can get forward, which hasn't really done as much in recent games, but he's got that in his locker. And I'm just picking one player. Obviously, I could have picked Lucas. I could have picked Xavi. I could have picked Van de Ven, obviously, even though he's already sort of almost there. And that's where the potential comes from. It really does. And if they can build on that and add to it, particularly a left winger, I feel like a top class left winger. And I'd love Antoine Semenyo, albeit I'm hearing it seems unlikely, unfortunately. But someone like that who could really complement what they've already got. Like, now we're seeing Xavi come to the party and hopefully kick on for me. He's only 22. Kudus is a really terrific player, but he doesn't really get in behind as much unless he drops his shoulder. If you can have someone who's a bit more direct on the left hand side, like a Semenyo, I mean, that they could really knit a team together that can do a lot of good things and grow together with the youth that they've got. It's very similar to Poch a few years ago. It sounds the same as me talking about Dele Alli and Eric Dyer and all those other players who grew, and that's kind of what made Spurs successful back then, albeit without winning anything, but by every other stretch of sort of measure of success they were. And I think that's where Spurs can be. But in terms of winning the title, we're always going to then come up against an Erling Haaland and a Man City buying the next Erling Haaland, or Arsenal now they spend £50 million on their backup fullbacks. So it's always going to be that challenge for Tottenham to compete against, unless there's a complete shift in how they go about doing things.
You just mentioned there Antoine Semenyo, unlikely, you said. Why should it be unlikely? Because we know that he's got a release clause in January. Spurs could go and sign this player and show real ambition in this January window, couldn't they? Why is it unlikely?
Because I'm told that he would be hesitant to go to Tottenham. Not because Tottenham wouldn't want him. I think they very much do want him. I think they went for him, pretty sure they went for him in the summer. He obviously ended up signing a new contract, and I could be wrong, but from the sources I've spoken to, I think he might be holding out for an Arsenal, a Liverpool, or a Man City. And there's even a chance that he stays till the summer because his release clause goes down then, which would be a real shame. I mean, I definitely hope I'm wrong about that, and they can get someone like him. I know he's had a bit of a dip in recent weeks and not quite hitting the same form as he did at the start of the season, but by all accounts, and again, back to that Alex Scott interview, I was chatting to him a bit in between the interview, and he's really close to Antoine Semenyo, and everyone at Bournemouth sort of rate him as such a great pro and person as well as a top player. And just think of where he's at in his career, like the next step, the motivation, all that. It just really seems perfect. But I don't want to be writing these stories saying he might not be interested. He doesn't seem like he needs some convincing, put it that way. So maybe let's see how it plays out. Maybe I'll be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing at the moment.
Tom, we'll talk about the squad and the transfer window in a second. Just want to stay on the subject of Thomas Frank. From when he was appointed in the summer to now, has your opinion changed on him?
What, as for his qualities or just generally?
Generally. And also let's talk about tactics, because what have you made of his tactics? We know that he is very versatile. We've seen a number of different formations. I must admit, at the start of the season, I saw that as a real positive. But then, when we lost those games, there was that period of time where we lost 4 in a row. I thought, actually, he keeps changing the formation. I don't think this is a positive thing anymore. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, that's just we're all saying that, but that's just classic. It's always results dependent, isn't it? And then it's performance related after that. It's the same for every manager anywhere. If you're winning games, no one's going to be complaining. They'll look to all the things you're doing differently compared to the last guy and hail them as the reason why they're it's working so well. And as soon as it starts to go wrong, those reasons will often be used against you. I do think he chopped and changed, but having said that, I do feel like he chopped and changed too much. I wonder if part of that was getting, was him coming back to this idea that he's never actually managed a team playing in Europe on a regular basis, that maybe he was preoccupied with the idea that he was going to have to manage their loads as much as he had to. Well, having said that, but look at what happened with Tottenham last season. They were absolutely, ravaged with injury, and Mickey van der Ven, we got to the end of last season where you were sort of watching him play, through behind your hands, because you were like, when's his hamstring going to go? One game I saw before he came on towards the end of the season, and he was getting a rub down from the physio before he came on, which went on for like 5 minutes on his hamstring, because it seemed like he was so worried about it. And Ange talked about the mechanics of his body and how they end up getting outside advice for him, all about that. And then has there been one moment this season where you've worried about it? I mean, I'll probably put the kiss of death on it now, and he'll get injured in the next game. But I think that's one of the biggest positives and ticks in the box for Thomas Frank, is how he's managed Mickey van der Ven and Richarlison. I know Richarlison's a divisive player for a lot of fans. A lot of them don't think he's good enough. His record actually isn't that bad. Goals for in starts. The guys were talking about in the Tottenham Way pod the other day, they were saying, was it 17 in his last 24 or 25 starts? He's got 17 goals. That's pretty good going. But we all know his lack of consistency is probably never going to change at this stage. And if you do want to get to where you're talking about, I don't think he's ultimately good enough to be the number one striker. But he's been doing pretty well under Frank, and his fitness record's been really good. So he's managed that really well. But at the same time, it feels like he's gone a bit far at times, and the formations. But I don't know. I feel like see an obvious some obvious like consistent attributes about the team, whoever's playing and what formation they're playing in. So long as you see like regular kind of way of playing, a sort of, what do I mean by that? I mean, like, are they always going to press in a certain way? There have been times before this week where I've gone, what is a Thomas Frank Spurs team? I'm just not really sure what it is. Like, he can keep changing the team and formation, and maybe that doesn't help. But I would have thought there would be certain characteristics which we saw regularly in his Brentford side that would be in this Tottenham side. Yes, maybe they'd be more direct than others managers have been before, but maybe it will be done in a really positive way. Like, direct doesn't have to mean, launch it up the pitch and long ball. It can mean getting it out to your quick attacking players quicker, so we can have those blistering counterattacks, kind of like how Conte had it when it was going really well. It could be really thrilling. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I've watched managers like Graham Potter when I used to cover Brighton. He used to pass the ball to death. It was boring. It never went to anything. Like that, it's got to be with a purpose. But I think there have been times where we haven't really seen that, and that's where I would be critical of him. But then again, in the last couple of games, I feel like we have started to see a few characteristics that have been consistent. And if we can see more of that going forward, then that will be that. Then that will answer those questions.
Tom, when you look at some of the games that we've played, particularly in the Premier League and at home, you have whole halves, whole 45-minute spells of no shots on target. And of course, your podcast you're involved with is called The Tottenham Way. That is certainly not the Tottenham way of not having a shot on target in 45-minute spells, is it? So do you think that we're going to see more of those sorts of games? Because Thomas Frank has openly come out and said, look, one thing I can guarantee is we're going to lose games, but Spurs fans want to see that attacking intent. Yes, we've seen it in the last couple of games, but some, the positive fan base they say, well, when we get Kulusevski back, when we get Maddison back and Solanke, things will be completely different. Do you take that view as well, that the fact that we have had so many critical injuries in that part of the pitch, in that final third?
Yes and no. They're obviously key players. He has often made the point that last season the front four was effectively Kulusevski, Solanke, Son, Maddison. It wasn't always that. Brennan Johnson, who's been fit the whole time, was absolutely key to last season. So he slightly overlooks him when he talks about last year. But there's no doubt those four have been absentees. Obviously, Son's gone permanently. And that has played a part. But this is where I have a slight issue with the club more than Frank. They knew that Maddison, they were after a new number 10 before Maddison got injured in Gibbs White. Then he gets injured for, let's be honest, if he plays again this season, it's not going to be surprised. But if he plays well this season, I will be surprised. It's likely he's going to be back in April, May. And after an injury like that, bear in mind how long it took him to get back into form after his ankle ligaments, like a long time. We're talking about sort of probably more like October when he's really sort of hopefully hitting, his best form. Maybe he'll surprise us and it'll be different, but I just don't think you can rely on it. And kind of similar to Kulusevski, we're still wondering when he's coming back. Frank now has basically told us to stop asking about Solanke and Kulusevski, which I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of, because maybe he thinks we're annoying journalists keep asking, but we are just conduits for the fans who want to know. So I don't know. Well, I'll ask you really. I mean, how do you how does that answer go down with you when you keep hearing him say to stop asking me when it comes
very
to
odd? It's very odd, Tom. And I was going to push you on that answer actually about the Solanke situation, because a manager has got to say surely when he is expected to be back. And it was only a few weeks ago when one of you guys asked and said, could he be back after the international break for the Arsenal away game, and could he start that game? And he said no, he won't start the game, but he could feature. And it seems like we're nearly at Christmas and we don't know when he's coming back. Do you find that whole situation a bit odd?
Well, what I think he's doing there is he doesn't want to come across like he's, misleading fans. He wants to be as honest as possible. And I genuinely think early this season, there were sort of genuine optimism after he had the surgery in September that he would hopefully be back after the October international break. And then quite quickly that obviously didn't turn out to be the case. And now we're here. I think he just doesn't want to promise anything that he can't deliver. That's where it comes from.
Well, but do you sorry to interrupt. Do you think he actually knows? Because Ange used to say, "Oh, it's okay, it's just a knock," and then a player would be out for months. And now Thomas Frank is answering this way. Do you think the managers actually do know? Because also, Tom, what I wanted to touch on is the medical department. It seems like for the last couple of years, under various different managers now, that we seem to see adverts being put out that Spurs keep replacing medical staff. Is that still an issue?
Well, they've definitely gone through a lot, haven't they, in the last few years? We've seen that with people coming and going, that there've been issues in the medical department of people not being completely convinced. I don't know now, whether that's going to happen again or not. I don't know whether it's about the manager not knowing. I mean, obviously it's down to a certain extent, it's down to the doctor. The player always thinks they're going to come back soon. I mean, it's weird. Kulusevski, there was that story in The Guardian a while ago, back in September, that he wouldn't be back till Christmas, effectively, which looks bang on, by the way, maybe even worse than that. And, I was trying to find out, speaking to people around Kulusevski, and they were really pushing back on that story. They really felt he'd be back sooner than that. Right. But where is he? He's not. So players always feel like they're going to get back sooner. I do think with injuries, just some things just often end up taking longer than everyone expects, and it's just not an exact science when it comes to medicine. And I just feel like Tottenham have a lot of bad luck when it comes to it. I highlighted before some of the positives that have happened, like Van der Ven, like Richarlison, the sort of muscle injuries they suffered so much last season seem to have gone down, and yet they've had numerous of these kind of freak injuries that keep happening. I do feel for him, but I also feel like his new stance of just don't ask me, I'll let you know. I don't think that really washes with fans either. I do think, eventually one of us is going to go, I'm not really sure that's good enough, Thomas. Like, the fans have been hearing this for ages, and you said one thing, and I know you're wary of trying to promise something that maybe you won't be able to deliver. I mean, to be fair, I went about it a different way about 3 weeks ago, maybe more, I asked him, do you think he'll be back before the end of 2025? Phrasing it in that way. And he said, I hope so. And even then you're like, whoa. So I might have to do that again, before February and see where we're at, because he doesn't want to give anything away. But now he's sort of just gone down this route now of just saying it like that. I don't know how much it sort of really washes with the fans. I mean, with Solanke, yeah. I mean, I'd heard like a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, to be fair, that sort of anecdotally from speaking to sort of football agents that they weren't sure, that there was a feeling that the club weren't sure when Solanke would be back. But that was a month ago. Maybe things have changed since then. I think with Frank's new stance, I guess one day they'll just pop up in the squad and they'll go, there you go, rather than sort of endlessly talking about it. But yeah, I don't know if it's going to go down too well with the fans, this whole approach of just basically saying nothing.
Tom, you've spoken about Yves Bissouma in the last 24 hours. What's the latest with him? Would you expect him to go out the door in the January window?
Yes, but interestingly, the story I did today was that. So obviously they were trying to move him on in the summer. Came very close to Fenerbahce. Then he got this injury. I think it was a knee. I'm trying to remember now. But then obviously he had the ankle playing for Mali and had surgery after that. He's had another indiscretion off the pitch with the laughing gas, which is the second time in less than 18 months. He obviously had it at the start of last season, where he inexplicably filmed himself doing it, got a club one-match ban imposed on him. Different situation now because he doesn't seem to be anywhere near the first team. Thomas Frank already left him out for the PSG Super Cup game because of his persistent lateness he was citing at the time. It's a real shame because I think Bissouma proved in the semi-finals and the final last season what an asset he can be and what a good player he is. But at this time, you probably look at that signing as not being a particularly positive one because of all the other problems that have come with him. But yeah, anyway, the story that I did today, which I found was quite interesting, is that, I would have presumed that if they can't sell him in January, that he just leaves for free in the summer. But I'm led to believe what's probably more likely if that doesn't happen, and I do think they will definitely try and sell him in January, is that he will have the option on his contract taken up. He's got an extra year on his contract, which Spurs have the option on. But it's not to keep him really. It's purely just to protect his value so they don't lose him for free and they can get some money for him next summer. But I think they're fully hoping to move him on in the January window because it's clear doesn't look like he's going to get anywhere near the team at the moment. And they're well stocked now with the emergence of Gray and Bergvall and obviously the signing of Paulinho in midfield.
In Thomas Frank's time at Spurs so far, is there anyone that you would say that is struggling with a Thomas Frank system or players that you think Thomas Frank don't fancy for the future and you could perhaps see them leaving in the January window or indeed the summer window in this current squad?
Well, the obvious person to look at is Brennan Johnson. He's gone from being the top scorer, 18 goals last season, the scorer in Bilbao, Johnson LA. Divisive player to a certain extent still, despite all those achievements. I think a lot of fans still don't rate him technically. And I kind of see where they're coming from. I just think sometimes it feels like the wrong way of looking at it. It's a bit like the Trent Alexander-Arnold debate with England. You're looking at all the things he can't do rather than things he can do. And to be fair, a few fans, when Spurs were going through that run of not scoring any goals, were asking for Johnson to get in the team because for whatever you might say about him technically, he does often create chaos and make chances happen and scores goals. But I feel with Brennan Johnson, at this stage of his career at least, and maybe he'll improve and turn into a better technical player than he is now. But I do feel that Ange's way of playing, he'll struggle to find a system that will play to his strengths as much as that system did. There's a reason he scored all those goals. It was all geared up. Ange even said it in one presser one time that he said, I wish I could be, if I was a right winger in one of my teams, I scored loads of goals. That was him, not me. I probably would miss. But yeah, because it was all geared up, isn't it, for the right winger to finish at the back post. We saw it so many times with Brennan Johnson. And that's just not how Thomas Frank has really played so far. And so it's not a surprise to sort of be wondering where Johnson fits into it. Then they signed a player in his position who looks undroppable in Mohamed Kudus and is technically a better player. You definitely would want to keep him in. So he's tried him out left, which is clearly the problem position in the Spurs side. There are options and young players like Tell and Odobert who hopefully will improve, but no one is really grasping the nettle in that position. And Johnson, from what I've seen when he played out there, even though I think he scored a couple of goals at the start of the season coming in off the left, I was never really convinced that suited his strengths. So unless he really adapts to it, and this is the one sort of caveat to all of this is comes back to this idea that Frank is this master developer of players. Like, if you give him time, then who's to say that these players won't improve and get used to a system and suddenly become way more effective? I mean, let's not forget, he tried to sign Brennan Johnson at Brentford. So that's by no means to say his time is up at Spurs. And I also would be really surprised if he left in January. Just a player like that, of his profile, it seems to be quite rare that kind of thing happens unless there's like some sort of fallout. But at this current stage, with the way they play and the fact that Kudus is there and they're trying to look at a new left winger, he's the main sort of big character. The guy who's, he's right in the front of the book because of what he did, who was sort of wondering, is he the odd man out this season?
Tom, whenever Spurs lose a game, the fan base, the most common thing I see and hear is Spurs don't have enough leaders. Is that fair? Do we need more leaders in this starting 11 under Thomas Frank?
Well, I think often when people talk about that, they sort of hark back, and it's easy to do because they're always on the telly these days. But we think of Roy Keane, don't we? We think of Patrick Vieira, we think of Steven Gerrard, we think of these personalities that played in the sort of yesteryear of Premier League, which when it comes to captains, Alan Shearer, those kind of players, you generally don't get that many of those anymore. But what I would say is Christian Romero, I don't think he's helped in terms of the perception of him being a leader by the fact that he doesn't really talk because he's not that comfortable in English. Although you have seen when he did that interview, the press conference ahead of, I forget which Champions League game it was, might be Villarreal. Was it the first one of the season where he did it? And it was through a translator. You see he's got real opinions, real insight. He's actually quite tactful in, I forget which topic came up, but he dealt with it very well. Is quite smart. And from everything that I've been told when researching the book in particular and just covering my job generally, he was the key figure in that drive towards the end of the season from the dressing room. Ange and him had a really close bond. You think you saw that from the social media stuff that came out after Ange left. And he's a complicated character at times. He's very driven, very demands a lot, has high expectations. But I think a lot of players really, really sort of resonate with him. I mean, do you remember after the Brighton game last season, the game after the parade, and obviously a terrible way to end the season, losing 4-1 at home. But Ange was asked, about Romero's future, because I think a lot of us were thinking this guy often keeps talking down Tottenham in interviews, and looks like he doesn't want to be there. The accusations of, prioritizing Argentina over the club, which I remember asking him directly in an interview in Perth the 2 years before, and he very much pushed back on, but they remained there, and understandably why, given, think of last international break in March when he came off after 68 minutes for Spurs at Fulham, then Spurs lose, and then he goes and plays 2 sets of 90 minutes for Argentina. So I understand where it comes from. But anyway, back to my point about Ange being asked about, should he stay? And he was unequivocal. He was like, no, you've got to keep him. Whatever happens to me, you've got to keep him. He's so essential. And that, from what I'm told from behind the scenes, very much underlines what a character and what a leader he is in the squad. So they definitely got one there. I think Van der Ven himself is growing in that on that front. And I think James Maddison, to be fair, is a good leader. He's just injured at the moment. It's hard to influence the dressing room when you're not in it because you're not playing. So I do think there are leaders there, but it does often feel like we all just want Roy Keane in our dressing room. And that's just doesn't not many people have, or Tony Adams, John Terry, whatever. Just there aren't many of those characters about anymore.
When you mention those sorts of characters like Roy Keane, that's the next question I was going to follow on with about aggression. Do you think Spurs are aggressive enough? And Thomas Frank uses that word a lot, doesn't he, about aggression? I think there have been certain games this season where we haven't been aggressive enough and we've been pretty soft. But some games you have seen us be very aggressive. And also, I love the fact that when Mickey van der Ven is wearing the captain's armband, you do see him be a lot more aggressive when he's wearing the armband.
Yeah, although the other day he got a suspension off the back of it, didn't he, by being a bit wavy with his elbow. But I think Van der Ven, in fact, it was the Fulham game, wasn't it? That you could sense he was the captain for that game, and you could sense the sort of frustration, to be honest, but the sort of responsibility he had. If it weren't for him, to be honest, with that a couple of amazing interventions, it could have been it should have been 3 or 4-0 by half time. But yeah, that kind of comes back to what I was saying about what is a Thomas Frank Tottenham team? What are the characteristics, regardless of personnel and formation, that we should be seeing every week, that he wants to be seeing every week? And we've asked that of him. And he says, like you say, he calls it aggressivity rather than aggression. I think that's just a translation issue. But yeah, aggression, desire, intensity of the pressing, and far too often we've not seen that in some of these bad performances. They haven't been like that. He talked about it ahead of the PSG game in the press conference out in Paris when reflecting on the Arsenal game. He came up with these number of duels that they hadn't won against Arsenal, which felt, to be honest, it felt to me a little bit football geeky for what fans might have wanted to hear. But he was making the point, look, I've looked into this, and I can tell you the numbers of where we were coming up short in that particular game. And that's where I really want to see them improve. And to be fair, I think that has improved a lot in the last 3 games with that side of things. And with Romero, particularly at Newcastle, which actually overall I thought wasn't a great performance. As it's a really great result, particularly for Tottenham, who always struggle up there. And Newcastle are obviously improving, got a really good team. But to get a result like that through Romero's sheer bloody mindedness, to score that header, what a header, to get in front of a player like Dan Burn, not easy, and then to get up off the bit. It wasn't just the overhead kick was a good skill, albeit it kind of came off his shin. It was what really impressed me from it was the desire to get up off the deck after you've been taken out, to get up when all the Newcastle players weren't reacting quick enough. I mean, that again underlines what a leader he can be. If not a sort of screamer and shouter. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there have been times this season where they've been too meek and not been aggressive enough. And I think Thomas Frank would agree with you on that. Hopefully they'll see more of that in the coming matches. Yeah.
Tom, lastly, we're going to cover the January transfer window. Now, I was out in South Korea when Son said goodbye to the South Korean fans. What an emotional evening that was. And of course, he returned to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Tuesday, pre-Slavia Prague game. What an emotional night that was again. Talking about the window, we've already touched on possible sign of Antoine Semenyo, but can you believe that Spurs allowed a player like Heung-min Son to leave? His assists output, his goal output, his creativity, his skill, his leadership, everything about him. Can you believe that Spurs allowed a player to leave like this and not replace him with a ready-made player? Because I think it's fair to say, and a lot of you journalists have asked Thomas Frank about that left position, and he's come out and said a number of times, it's about competition. But we need a player to come in now and be that ready-made player like Antoine Semenyo. What are the chances of Spurs going out and signing a left winger in January? And also, what are the main priorities that you know about at the moment?
Firstly, I think it was probably the right time for Son to go, despite his legacy. I think he wanted to go by the end of it. And I think he's been thinking about it for a while, and it was the perfect fitting moment to go, having lifted that trophy. And it was the right thing. But the second part of your question, can I believe they didn't replace him? No, well, I can, because that's what they did when Harry Kane left, they didn't sign anyone then until like a year later to replace him. And they made a mistake then. It's interesting throughout the summer window. During the summer pre-season, Thomas Frank's sort of narrative on that, if I remember rightly, kind of changed. It kind of suggested at first that they weren't desperate to replace him. And I remember asking him, I think he might have said that on tour. I wasn't there, but speaking to Ali Gold, I think he was telling me that they did a sit down out there, and he sort of suggested, I think I got this right. If I'm wrong, apologies, but that maybe they obviously they signed Tal permanently and had the other options in the team, and maybe left wing at that moment wasn't the priority. And then I remember them getting thrashed by Harry's Bayern side. I was out in Munich in the mix zone there and asked Frank then, would you still think you need to replace him? And he kind of changed his tune a little bit. And obviously, I don't know. I mean, Mohamed Kudus kind of to a certain extent is his replacement this summer, albeit he plays on the other side of the pitch, but as the sort of wide talisman of the team. But it's clear that they are lacking in that left-hand side. I think maybe the thought was that because they've got personnel, haven't they? They've got numbers. They've got, obviously Wilson Odobert. They've got Matisse Tell. They've got Brennan Johnson. Xavi, when he first signed, Thomas Frank kept talking up his ability to play wide left, which I am skeptical of. But again, having said that, we haven't seen him do it now that he seems like he's getting up to speed. So you might find that in the coming weeks, if he is played out wide left, he might do better than he has done before. I don't know. But naturally, he's clearly better at the number 10. And then there might be a couple of others that I'm forgetting. There's just a lot of Kolo Muani can play out left there as well, can't he? So they probably felt like numbers-wise they're okay. But what has seemed to be the case throughout this first half of the season is no one, at least yet, and I think a lot of people are skeptical whether they will be in the near future, is really good enough to be that key man out there, which seems like such a key position to make Tottenham's whole attack work. So it doesn't surprise me from what I'm hearing, I mean, as proved by the interest in Semenyo, that they are looking for that particular position. But as Spurs fans will be frustrated as ever to hear that it's difficult in January. But how often do you land a top player like that in January? I don't know. It might be tricky to do.
No, I agree, Tom. I think there are going to be a lot of frustrated Spurs fans in the January window, because I think, a lot of people expect us to go big. But, I'm one of those people who are very realistic about a January window. They are very, very difficult. The one I'll be judging on is the summer one. But let me ask you, what's your expectations of Tottenham in the January transfer window? Will we bring in one or two players?
I hope so. I can't say that I know for sure at the moment. It's probably now where I'm starting to sort of try and find out a bit more about this. But the fact that they are heavily interested in Semenyo would suggest yes. I don't. Back to the Semenyo thing. I mean, again, I hope I'm wrong, because I think he'd be so perfect for them. But the idea of a player being sort of hesitant to join Spurs, I mean, I guess when you're looking at it from his perspective, he could go to a club that is in a position to win the Premier League now, or potentially that could be the case. So that's always going to be attractive. But Spurs at the moment, I wonder if top players are looking at them thinking, where are they going to go? Because yes, they won the Europa League, got back into the Champions League, but they finished 17th, had this interesting start under Frank. If they can sort of have a really strong second half of the season and get into the Champions League again, then they'll look like more of a sure thing to a certain extent going forward. Whereas, if you're going to put your future as a sort of established 25-year-old, looking for that big next move, then that might come into their thinking to a certain extent. Whereas, Arsenal look like they're ready to win the Premier League. Man City are always going to be in the mix. Even Chelsea look like even though they still got their hiccups and they seem to be too focused on young players, maybe look a sort of more attractive proposition if you have no allegiance to any of the clubs. And that's before we even talk about wages, which we've already mentioned. So that might be part of it as well. But I sincerely hope, personally, a top class left winger would be pretty transformative for this side. And under Daniel Levy, it was pretty common that they would either not sign anyone permanently, or they take a long time to sign someone in January. What a way it would be to sort of announce this and back up this talk of a new era to bring in someone, not only a real sort of statement signing, and it doesn't have to be like a sort of massive name. It could just be someone who really gets the juices flowing, and do it early in January. That would be fantastic. But again, like everything else, we're still skeptical about it because it's the same owners effectively as it has been for all this time.
Tom, I know we've spoken about the left wing position, but any other positions where you think that Tottenham and Thomas Frank will look to strengthen in January and perhaps even in the summer? And also, will it be Premier League experience that they'd be looking at again?
Well, that's what they've done a bit more recently, haven't they? They've admitted that they went too hard on just young players. And I do feel like Ange was dealt a bit of a difficult hand last summer. I feel like, he had the first summer where he lost Harry and didn't get him replaced. Yes, they got Solanke the following year, but that was the following year. What I'm talking about? Yeah, it's the following year. He didn't have Solanke, did he, first season? Then he did get them through, but I think he was hoping that, all right, now having got, finished fifth without Kane, they could kick on and bring in a few more established players. I mentioned some of them in the book, players that I understand that he wanted that they didn't get. And it didn't happen. And they went to, Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall look like real sort of first team options now, but they weren't when they first signed, all those months ago. And so that didn't really help. They feel like they learned from it to a certain extent. Paulinho was a Xavi signing, as far as I'm concerned, on loan. So yeah, I hopefully they'll sign a couple more, but I can't say for sure at this point what they'll do on that front.
Tom, coming to the end now, Xavi Simons, what have you made of him in a Spurs shirt? Because I must admit, when we signed him in the summer, I've seen a number of glimpses from Xavi Simons to tell me that he is going to be a star. And in my opinion, I think that Thomas Frank has actually managed his minutes extremely well, having been on the bench 4 times, then of course starting, then grabbing the opportunity. And I always say that it's about a player grabbing the opportunity when they get it. A future star at Tottenham, without any doubt.
I wouldn't go that far. Without any doubt, seems like pretty definitive. I've been really encouraged by his last week. He's been very, very good in the last week. I remember being in that in the Dortmund stadium where he scored that absolute worldie against England in the semi-final. So his talent's been clear, albeit it was a long ranger. So he probably won't do that for Spurs because Thomas Frank doesn't like shots from outside the box much. But yeah, he's obviously had pedigree since he was young. I have to say I was very underwhelmed by his first couple of months, even with the idea that he was coming into a new league and he was young and the team were sort of struggling from a creative point of view. I was expecting a bit more. It wasn't so much like his performances of not scoring goals and assists straight away. It was just like the amount of games I'd watch where he'd have really careless passes. He did it in his first game. You thought, all right, it's just signed. He put the ball straight out of play against West Ham, but he was still doing it a few games later. And you were like, well, this is a guy who's supposed to be like really, like a sort of absolute magician on the ball and really, graceful player. Like, it just felt quite careless more than anything. But he seems to have cut that out. He seems to have got to grips with the physicality in recent weeks. His composure on the ball is what had been lacking from the team. Someone in that position who doesn't get flustered in those attacking positions. And now we're starting to see him demand the ball. And one of the things I really like in the last couple of games, he's been quicker with it. He's getting the ball and laying it off. He's making passes. Yeah, sometimes he carries it when the moment allows. Prime example being the goal against Brentford. Brilliant. Obviously scored a wonderful goal. But particularly the other day against Brentford, they pick it up, lay it off, pick it up, lay it off, and then look to make movements. I feel like too much he was trying to hold on to the ball too much at the start of his Spurs first few months of his career. A bit like Bergvall last season, did that a lot in his first few months. And what I liked as well against Brentford was the shift he put in as well. Like, I didn't quite think he had that in his locker, but look at his shirt. It was covered in mud, his socks, his shorts. He was putting in challenges. He was being physical. He feels like he's really kicked on in recent weeks. And I thought he should have started against Fulham. So you talk about managing his minutes sort of masterfully. I feel like that was a mistake to a certain extent, not playing against Fulham. But when you consider how he's played in the last few games, there is definitely an argument to be had that maybe Frank has managed him better than people were suggesting. Maybe a bit like how Ange did with Jed Spence. I mean, people kept saying about why wasn't he playing him, but then the player that he became, I mean, Ange, people always say, well, you just got lucky because you had injuries, so you had to play him. Ange might argue it differently and say, look, he needed to prove that he was completely committed after all the things that had happened before. And then look at him now, he's like an England international. And maybe we're seeing the same thing in a different way with Xavi Simons. So I'm hoping he can now go and produce something similar as he has done the last couple of games, up away at Forest, for a good victory for Spurs and sort of kick on from here.
I always mention those positive things, Tom, because I think that there is always a lot of negative things to say when things have gone wrong. So I think when things go right, it's very important to give the positives as well. Can I just ask you, going back to the summer transfer window before Xavi actually signed, the Morgan Gibbs-White situation and the Eze situation, just very quickly, could Spurs have done any more to got those deals done, or was it completely out of Tottenham's hands?
Well, it felt like with Eze, I mean, I don't know whether Arsenal were sort of lurking in the background the whole time or not. But the word that I was getting, from Arsenal was they weren't that bothered for quite a long time. Maybe they were just playing a great poker hand. I don't know. But it felt like there was an opportunity there. And as far as I'm led to believe from the people close to Eze, he was very much sort of open to joining Tottenham. Yes, he would have preferred Arsenal for a lot of reasons, but he was very much open to joining Tottenham. And the thought process was that it was going to happen. So if you remember, Crystal Palace played away at Chelsea when they drew 0-0 and Eze played. And I got the word, as did a few other journalists, that he probably wasn't going to feature in that game because he was going to move to Tottenham. And that was definitely the word coming down from people close to him, let alone, from Tottenham's perspective. So it all felt very on the cards at that point. Then he obviously did play in the end. He didn't play in the next one, which was in the Euro Conference League. And then it all happened with Arsenal. So maybe, I guess from their perspective, they couldn't have done any more. But if there was this opportunity to really sort of wrap it up, maybe. But maybe Arsenal were always just waiting and had Spurs, been on the cusp of getting a deal done, which is what it felt like happened anyway. Maybe that's when they were going to go, right, here we go. But it does feel to a certain extent like that. That one in particular was the one that got away. And then with Gibbs-White, it was this whole situation with the clause. Chairman. But then again, I was getting the sense from sort of Forest end, as much as there was like an anger with Tottenham at the time for, discovering this supposed secret clause, that it probably would get done. And that would probably mean, Spurs having to pay more.
What was the thing though, Tom? Was it some like random number of the release clause? Was that what it was? Was it just like some random number like?
No, all I can go on is what I was sort of told at the time. So I haven't seen the documentation, but my understanding from the sort of Forest perspective was that if it was as simple as you hit a number and therefore he is released, then why hasn't it happened yet? When we thought it was going to happen, and it hadn't happened before the sort of legal letters went through and all that kind of stuff. So the inference being there would have been clauses within that release clause, or points or factors, whatever, that weren't quite met by a simple 60 million. But honest answer is I don't know for sure, but that was what I was told at the time. And that was ultimately what proved to be the case. But I was also sort of told that, maybe if they find a way to make that extra compensation, then they would have got the deal done. But it didn't happen in the end.
Tom, very last question for you. What would be a successful season for Thomas Frank in his first year at the football club? And also, I'd like you to predict the top four, including where Spurs will finish in the Premier League.
I think going into the season, finishing 7th and above is actually a successful season for Spurs, given where they were last season in the Premier League, given that a lot of their creative players, even though they knew they were going to be injured, maybe not Solanke, that's a bit different, but particularly Kulusevski and Maddison, they knew to be long-term absentees, but they are not available. And all the change that's happened, I think that's actually not a bad league position. Ideally winning one of the cups. Obviously, that'll be down to the FA Cup now. Be really shocked if they won the Champions League. I just don't think they're good enough. But getting through to the playoffs, getting through to the knockouts, whether it be through the playoffs or through top 8, which would be fantastic, would I think be a good achievement. And if they can get a favourable draw in the next round, then see as far as they can go with that one will be sort of a bonus. I mean, I do think that Tottenham, if they're when they're playing well under Frank and is really organised, and hopefully will build from here, they could probably give anyone a game, as was been proved from the PSG game. But I just look at a lot of the other teams in Europe, Arsenal, Bayern Munich, PSG, to name just 3. I just think they've got much better squads. So it would be a real sort of shock for Liverpool. They've obviously got amazing players. I think that would probably be about right. And then regarding the top 4, I think Arsenal, Man City to win it. There's obviously a space there for Tottenham with the teams after that, but I still think Chelsea will probably have enough. I quite like Newcastle. Looking at their team, I think they've been a bit unlucky this season. Some of it's self-inflicted. They haven't played that well. Obviously, the old Alexander Isak's issues at the start of the season, but I think they've got a good team and a good squad now. And a lot of their games, even like last night, I was watching them play at Leverkusen, and they drew, but they hit the post and they should have won that game. And I think maybe their rub of the green will go for them at some point, kind of like it did second half of the season last year. So they're in for a good position. I still don't fancy Man United, even without any Europe. I'm just not really sure by Amorim. So there's the Spurs. And then obviously I've forgotten Aston Villa. So Aston Villa, of course, I think I fancy Villa over Tottenham. So I think maybe Spurs probably about 6th or 7th, and I don't think that's a bad first step by any stretch, given where they've come from.
Tom, before we talk about your book again, I've got to ask you, I know I said that was the last question, I've got to ask you about England. Of course, World Cup in 2026. Is it going to be England's year? We've been waiting so long.
I sincerely hope so. I mean, we were so close, weren't we? I was in the Berlin Stadium for the final. I like what I've seen from Thomas Tuchel, and I know we always do well in qualifying, but I've really been impressed in the recent games, ever since the sort of Serbia 5-0, of what he's been doing. I feel like there's a real obvious approach he's taking. He's picking the right players in the right positions. I love the idea of competition, number 10. We've got to get Jude Bellingham in there because he's such a great player. But I also like what he's done with Rodgers and what he brings out the best of Kane. And then obviously that's before you even talk about Foden and Palmer. But I like how he's almost saying, right, well, you guys are competing for that spot because we need a team that works as a team. So I need Rashford or Gordon out left. I need Madueke or obviously Saka will be the starter outright because they provide a better balance. Anderson, the way he's come into it, has been brilliant to play with Declan Rice, who looks like the best player in the Premier, or one of the best players in the Premier League now. So we've got so many options, and I think that's really going to help us. It's just the conditions, albeit obviously Dallas is going to be in air conditioning, so that will help. I think our hopes are down to Harry Kane to a certain extent. He was looked so knackered in the last one, and that's what ultimately did for us. But if Harry Kane's playing anything like he's shown this season, he can score in every match, and that's always going to give us a chance. So, why not? We're going to win it.
Lots to look forward to. Anyway, Tom, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tell everyone about your wonderful book again, Miracle in Bilbao, the inside story of the Europa League triumph. An excellent book, excellent read. Tom, everyone's got to buy this, haven't they, for their loved ones for Christmas?
Well, I hope so, if they're Tottenham fans. Yeah. The idea behind it was, obviously I was at pretty much every game, every press conference, home and away, most of them at least anyway. And I felt like in, if not a unique position, then a pretty privileged position of only a handful of reporters who at all these games got to hold Ange to account, got to ask him questions, got to get a feel for the guy beyond just what you might see on TV. And we had this mad season, which will never be replicated, where they obviously won a trophy, and hopefully that will be replicated many times over in the coming future. But obviously it's been a long time since then. But we had this nightmare of a league campaign, frustrations off the pitch with the owners, with the manager at times, Sonny's last season, so many things to sort of report on. And whatever comes next for Tottenham, whether it be another 17 years, hopefully not, without a trophy, or whether this was the start of a golden era for Tottenham, this feels like a sort of moment in time that I was lucky enough to be at and wanted to capture as a sort of memento of that season. And when you go back through it, I've written it, majority of it sort of in the present tense throughout that season. There's a start of it, which is kind of the season before, which is done in the past tense, but most of it's done in the present tense to give you that immediacy. The idea is to get you back into what it was like, whether it be being at Bournemouth away and having Ange, have a go back at the fans from the negative to obviously being in Bilbao and having the sort of moments tick down as the final whistle approached, and Maddison on the touchline, injured, and along with the other players who come off, can hardly watch as Vicario goes up for that that cross, and it hits him in the top of his shoulder, and there's Højlund with a pretty good header, and then there's Van der Ven clearing off the line. All those moments, which are obviously I imagine etched in every true Spurs fan's memory anyway. But here, hopefully, it'll be there in the book to remind you for years to come.
Do you know, there's some wonderful pictures in this book as well. And this one, Tom, which made me laugh, because I remember actually looking down and watching this happen live, of Daniel Levy not looking Ange in the eye, having just won the Europa League. It's, crazy. But yeah, all of the details are in the description. So do go and buy Tom's fantastic book. And lastly, Tom, tell everyone about the podcast, what they can expect from that, and what they can expect from your YouTube channel in the near future.
Oh, that's really kind, Chris. Yeah, so the podcast we do is called The Tottenham Way. It's with Buckland, who I imagine a lot of Spurs fans will be aware of these guys. So there is the three journalists who cover Spurs regularly, myself, Tom Allnutt of the Times, and George Sessions of Press Association, who all three of them, hopefully, well, those two definitely have some great Spurs takes. They're Spurs fans as well. So I'm the only one who's not a Tottenham fan, but obviously I offer a slightly different perspective at times. But they deal with Spurs on a weekly basis and come up with some of the great questions that you, or maybe not so great questions sometimes, in the press conferences that you guys listen to. And Marcus, who's a broadcaster for all the broadcasters, Sky mainly, is our almost resident fan, because he's the one who's the season ticket holder and often in the other part of the ground when we're in the press seats watching the games. And we do reaction podcasts after every game, and try to do things in between as well. You can find it now on YouTube at the Tottenham Way Pod, but you can find it on wherever you get your podcasts, and you can, it's just called the Tottenham Way. And as for my YouTube stuff, like I say, it's been going for a couple of years. It's something I need to really sort of start doing more regularly. I try to do them after each match, for my own opinion, and after press conference as well, to sort of talk about the latest talking points, and various sort of features as well for the stuff I've been writing, the stories, information I've been trying to find out about what's going on at Spurs. So that's at Tom Barclay Journalist. So if you wouldn't mind following, give it a subscribe. Really appreciate it.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me. I've taken up nearly 2 hours of your time. You did say to me earlier, how long is this going to be for? And I said I could ask you questions all night. But what I would say is, please don't leave it, another year before you come on again next time.
Just let us know, mate, whenever you fancy it, and maybe give it at least a month. But when you want to next, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to waffle on for a while and obviously talk about the book, which is hopefully will make some Spurs fans happy over Christmas.
Thank you, Tom. Yep. Remember, everyone, buy the book and follow Tom on YouTube, and of course, listen to the Tottenham Way podcast. Tom, thank you so much. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. And until the next time, come on, you Spurs.